The holiday season is here, and this week in Texas politics was a week that was a little grinchy. How grinchy? Well, let's get our headlines from our panel, and we'll start with Mark Jones from Rice University. Mark, what's your headline for the week?
The longest year, the Texas legislature in session for 246 days. That's a record.
Brad Johnson from the Texan News, what's your headline for the week?
It's over, finally.
And Robert Downen with the Texas Tribune, what's your headline for the week?
I'm going to go with, boy, that was ugly.
Now, we're referring to Special Session 4, I think, on that one. And Special Session 4 came to an end pretty much the way that the other ones did, failing to pass a school choice plan. Brad, the Lieutenant Governor, threw all the blame on the House Speaker, Dade Phelan. You were at the news conference when he threw those grenades. What was your take?
The biggest takeaway I had was really the mixed messaging. He came out and said, I'm not going to get involved in House races, and then proceeded to provide a litmus test for voters for their individual House members. Ask them specifically, will they support Speaker Phelan in the next legislative session as Speaker? And if they don't, vote against them. So a little bit of mixed messaging there from the Lieutenant Governor.
Mark, are you surprised that a school choice plan just didn't make it out in all these? I'm a little surprised.
On one hand, yes, in the sense that the governor certainly put a lot of capital behind it. It always had a lot of support in the Senate. I think, though, that the growing acrimony between the House and the Senate, and particularly between the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor, got in the way. And probably the stake that drove, the stake that was driven through the heart of school choice was the acquittal of Attorney General Ken Paxton. After that, it was going to be really tough to ever get the House to effectively do something that a majority in the House simply did not want to do.
Robert, it's kind of like the devil's in the detail. You can say school choice, oh, that sounds great, but it's the details. That is what seems to have gotten this, right?
Sure, and I think, it's the same story that has really been at the core of this broader dispute over school choice, for years now, which is rural opposition. And yet again, we're seeing that opposition just is not going to be overcome. It doesn't seem like, at least during this session. I won't forecast for the next, but we've seen where it stood going, with the end of this special session. So.
Well, for Governor Greg Abbott, V doesn't stand for victory. It now stands for vendetta. He reacted this week by ramping up his party primary campaign against the House Republicans who didn't vote for a school choice plan. Mark, are you seeing any signs that this strategy will flip any kind of votes at the ballot box to help him down the road?
It has the potential to. Now, normally incumbents do pretty well, but we haven't had this type of gubernatorial intervention in recent years where the governor has specifically gone after, more than a dozen state House members. I think the governor is now going with plan B. He realizes with these 21 or so rural Republicans, he's not going to be able to bring them over to the school choice side. So now he's going to plan B, which is replacing them. And if he can get that number down to say 10 or 12, then it becomes very feasible to pass school choice in 2025. Either by pressuring a couple of them to come over or going on the Democratic side where there are some votes for school choice, particularly among some more moderate African-American Democrats who aren't going to come over until they know that their vote is the deciding one, and particularly where they can get something in benefit for it in terms of, say, more resources for their community.
The first rule of the Republicans is never go after another Republican, and yet the governor's going after Republicans. So doesn't this just go against everything that's GOP?
Well, I mean, if we're going off the Ronald Reagan thing, I think he's been spinning for quite some time, given the state of Texas GOP politics. But yeah, I mean, I think that, we're already seeing Abbott kind of, not even tease really, but forecast what his strategy going into the primaries is, endorsing a number of people who, have previously attacked him, endorsing them over, people who were opposed to school vouchers. And I think that that's probably something that is going to be emblematic of this primary is a lot of intra-party fighting, a continuation of a trend that has been ongoing, but certainly ramped up since really May and the Paxton impeachment, and exploded even further in the wake of some of our reporting, which I'm sure we'll get to as well. So.
Brad, what do you think? Do you think that this is the only thing that the governor can do is this V for Vendetta campaign, or maybe one more Hail Mary, one more special session?
Well, I think as far as the governor has planted his flag against a cap on an ESA program, the votes are the votes and they're not changing. There were the votes in the House for the first HB1 that had those guardrails, but the governor found those to be unsatisfactory and came out against it. And then we saw the next HB1 that actually made the floor come out and go down in a blaze of glory. So I think at this point, all he has is to try and flip some seats. And the delta, as Mark said, is 10 to 12 or so. And then you can actually start to talk about getting an ESA program across the finish line.
Now, a player in this GOP family feud for the primaries could be a controversial political group known as Pale Horse Strategies. We learned that group has now changed its name to West Fort Worth Management, West Fort Worth Management LLC. That's a mouthful. Now, you may remember a Nazi sympathizer earlier this year had a meeting at the Pale Horse office with key leaders. Robert, you broke this original story. You reported this name change on Thursday. How's this group explaining its rebranding?
Well, they're really not explaining anything. I think their strategy since we broke that story on October 8th has been to just put their heads down and, have some of their allies go to bat for them, try to poke holes in our reporting on not only their ties to Nick Fuentes, but their ties to other anti-Semitic and extreme figures. And the kind of, the strategy seems to just put your head down, not say anything, and hope that no one notices, that you file paperwork to operate under a new name. Now, I should be clear, this is not a new name in full. What they filed for is something that allows them to operate under that name. So Pale Horse as a brand still exists, but this new group, West Fort Worth Management, which, as you said, is as mundane as it is a mouthful, has already started popping up, posting job advertisements, and operating under the guy or operating as Pale Horse Strategy. So,
Mark, historically, do these work, rebranding like this?
You think we can go back to Jeremiah, does the leopard change its spots? And the answer is usually no. And so as a result, I don't think so. I mean, it'll help maybe a little bit, but at the end of the day, everything's going to be linked back both to the company as well as the individuals involved, who, at least for the sort of short to medium term, are pretty toxic in most circles.
Brad, you agree? GOP voters, short-term memory?
Oh yeah, and we'll see. Take the biggest story of the year, the Paxton impeachment. Does that even really play in these primary fights? I think of all the issues, that probably has the biggest chance. But that and school choice, we're really going to see a test of how short term the memory is for voters.
Yeah, and you were going to say, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more related to the individuals themselves. They're going to be an unwanted liability for any campaign. And so why, as a campaign, if you don't need to use them, are you going to use them when you're essentially just serving up an issue for your opponent? And that's probably not going to change for a few years. I mean, maybe they can do some subcontracting behind the scenes, but things that are visible are going to be more difficult.
New car then, Robert? New car, new message, new people?
I think that, with respect to Pale Horse or just the Texas GOP more broadly?
Well, I think just with Pale Horse and trying to move this away, to drive away, get in a new car and drive away from the scandal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's going to be more difficult than, just rebranding. We should also note that it is not just Pale Horse that is at the core of this controversy. It is Defend Texas Liberty, the political action committee that is, one of the most prolific donors to right-wing candidates and movements in the state. And, Jonathan Stickland, the leader of Pale Horse, who hosted Nick Fuentes at his offices, has been removed as president. But other than that, it doesn't seem that the PAC or really that whole orbit has much of an appetite to say publicly what they're doing to ameliorate these concerns. And so until that happens, I think that it's an open question to voters about if anything has changed at all. And I do think also, we talk a lot about how this is going to affect the intra-party squabbles, but on the other side of this of the equation are voters who, maybe looking at what's happening and saying, I do need to vote. Maybe, I can't defer to the people who are meeting with, Hitler admirers. And I think that there is another side of this that also could be potentially have a lot of political ramifications as well. So,
I mean, I guess in terms of Defend Texas Liberty, at this point, when I was talking about the toxic level, I was referring more to Stickland. Then I think Defend Texas Liberty has been able to, at least with the base, keep themselves in a decent position. Now whether that a more moderate Republican can use that to mobilize people, as Robert was mentioning, that becomes an issue. But I don't think the core base is going to look all that askance at Defend Texas Liberty now, especially since they've made since they removed Stickland and he effectively is seen, or at least is being presented as the person that effectively arranged the meeting and engaged in all of this. Their money and their resources are pretty powerful. And I don't think their brand has been hurt among the core base, which is a very influential group in these low turnout Republican primaries.
Brad, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a test of how insidery this story actually is. Does the average Republican voter even know who Jonathan Stickland or Defend Texas Liberty are? Personally, I think the Paxton impeachment and school choice are going to be far bigger movers for the average Republican voter in next year's primary. This is just kind of window dressing, though among insider circles, it is changing a lot. And we see the turmoil in the Republican Party of Texas caused by it. But for the average voter, I'm not seeing it moving much.
The Pale Horse Nazi scandal did come up during the Texas Republican Executive Committee meeting over the weekend of the group denouncing anti-Semitism, but failed to approve a ban on associating with Nazi sympathizers. Denouncing that failed vote was the one thing this week that House Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor seemed to be able to agree on. Brad, have you heard anything about this costing the GOP chair, Matt Rinaldi, his job?
Well, there's some within the Republican Party of Texas, especially the SREC, trying to rally support for a challenge to Rinaldi. But frankly, I think it'd be very difficult to do that. He was unopposed last time. I've heard names such as Dana Myers, the vice chair, is considering a bid against him. SREC member Chris Byrd, but nothing's been announced yet. And overall, the delegates, 10,000 of them will elect the next chairman. And, as the incumbent, I think Rinaldi is in pole position, and it would take a lot to oust him, I think.
Rinaldi hasn't admitted being in part of that meeting with the Nazi sympathizer, but he was in the building. So, Robert, what are you hearing? What are you hearing about his potential job future?
I think Brad kind of hit it on the head. I think that, there's obviously a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the more moderate wing of the Texas GOP and its governing body, as we saw this weekend with this votes that, was rejected, that would have banned them from associating with Nazi sympathizers and Holocaust deniers. But again, I do think that, behind Rinaldi is a very powerful handful of players, the same players that are driving much of the far right of Texas politics, West Texas billionaires. And I do think that really, just is an advantage that really is hard to put, to put metrics to, that I think is going to make it very hard for him to be just removed.
So if Rinaldi stays, does he become the fall guy for the GOP if things go sideways in the primary, Mark?
No, well, he's going to stay. They're not going to get rid of him. They have to wait till the convention to do anything. But I think, for Abbott, for the power players in terms of electeds, Abbott, Patrick, Cruz, at some point they need to make a decision of how active they want to be in choosing the chair of the Texas GOP. Recently, they've sort of let that go on its own course, and organically, it's going to get you to Matt Rinaldi or Alan West or somewhere one like that. And so I think, as I think Brad and Robert mentioned, absent Abbott and Patrick and Cruz openly getting involved to try to shift to somebody who doesn't cause as much negative PR as Rinaldi has for the Texas GOP, he's likely on course to be reelected.
GOP leaders may have avoided a really big misstep when the governor certified the November vote results. The move appears to protect the constitutional amendments that were passed, especially the GOP's big property tax break and a teacher retirement pay bump. But a lawsuit had been filed challenging the results, claiming ballot box voting machines were connected to the internet. The Secretary of State said the vote canvassed by the governor made those lawsuits moot. But if that is beat in court, I'm hearing, a January special session is likely, maybe to fix that problem, maybe providing one more shot for school choice. What do you guys think about that, Brad?
I think if that does happen, they'll probably give it another shot, though expecting pretty much the same results. As far as I'm aware, the governor's sights are basically fully on the primaries. And as I said before, the votes are the votes. And without changing some seats, that's not going to change at all.
Come on, it's Super Bowl week, Robert. A Hail Mary has just got to be it, right? January special 5, right?
I mean, I think what Brad said is pretty spot on. I think that, this kind of, I think that it is possible, but I also think you have to wonder whether another defeat of this school voucher legislation going to the primaries could actually kind of backfire and just be another reminder to a lot of voters that this is, that this thing has failed many times and ultimately backfire politically. But, alternatively, continuing to highlight that the failure of that passage, I think it could also, I guess, could be advantageous going to the primaries depending on how Abbott's playing it. But
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Can the governor afford another loss in a special session 5, Mark?
No, and actually, when I go back to this, part of me sort of, when I look at this whole election debate, part of me wonders how much of it was manufactured effectively just to sort of make Dade feel and look bad. In that, I'm not sure exactly how much threat there would be for these results actually not to be counted, in that the governor does have the power to certify. These are way out in left field, sort of nutcase type complaints. So given the Republican control of the court apparatus, I'm skeptical that we're not going to be approving the most significant property tax relief in modern history, simply because a couple of nutcases in Bexar County and elsewhere decide to file a frivolous lawsuit.
Texas Democrats are thinking about the ballot box, rebooting their effort to expand mail-in ballots to everyone, challenging the age requirement here in Texas. Brad, you've been following this story, tweeted it out on Friday, the new movements with the Supreme Court.
So a writ was filed basically to revive a 2020 case that was originally filed by the Texas Democrats. It looks like they are no longer officially party to this case, but basically asking SCOTUS to jump in and rule on 26th Amendment grounds that the state's restriction on mail-in balloting to only those 65 or older or disabled or out of the state at the time is discriminatory against all voters that don't meet that requirement. So it was dismissed out of hand by the appeals court in 2020. We'll see if it has any legs, but I think probably not. This law has stood up for a while, and they basically took a Hail Mary shot when COVID was happening and couldn't connect on that. So I don't see that happening here.
All right, and with that, let's wrap up our week with the final word. And Mark, we'll start with you. What's your word for the week?
Whitmire.
Brad, summing up with a word for us.
Diminuendo, opposite of crescendo. Things are calming down. It's Christmas time.
And Robert, close it out with a word.
Over-ish.
Little hyphen, yeah, that's good. And with over-ish, that's it for this week in Texas politics.